Hello, thank you for joining our Signal Media webinar series. I'm Kimberly Underwood, Senior Editor at AFCEA International Signal Magazine. I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar, which is entitled The Transition to Teleworking and the Need for IT Modernization in the Time of COVID. The webinar is sponsored by Hitachi Vantara Federal, and the need to quickly adapt to the new ways of working and communicating during the pandemic has led to infrastructure holes. Our panel of experts will discuss how modernized IT environments can address these architecture gaps and how to establish technology-driven trust in such environments. The panelists will also go through risk management strategies to safeguard remote data accessibility. I'd like to introduce you to our panel. Gary Hicks is the Chief Technology Officer at Hitachi Vantara Federal. Gary has been in the IT world for 25 years. As CTO, he is responsible for architecting, implementing, and maintaining custom technology solutions for customers, including storage and data protection capabilities. Before his work at the company, Gary served as a program architect at the Cloud Services Division at IBM, where he was responsible for more than $500 million cross-brand sales strategy. Then we have Carrie Connor, who is the Senior Director of Services and Delivery at the company. Carrie has over 20 years of experience leading and supporting IT strategy and transformation initiatives for both public and private organizations. She leads the delivery of strategic programs to ensure client success in both civilian and defense accounts, and she also is leading the deployment of RIAN cloud solutions. Carrie is a certified project management professional and holds a bachelor's degree in commerce from the University of Virginia's McIntire School of Commerce and a master's degree in business administration from Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. We also have Bobby Roundtree. Bobby is the data intelligence lead at Hitachi Vantara Federal, and he currently serves as CEO of the Dapper Data LLC brand. Bobby has more than a decade of experience in data management, programming, and data science, and he specializes in helping people make better decisions with their data. Bobby holds a bachelor's degree in computer science from Bowie State University, a master's degree in cybersecurity from UMUC, and he is currently pursuing a doctorate in data science from North Central University. After our experts' discussion, we will have Q&A for as long as time permits during this hour-long session, and to submit a question electronically, you'll use your Ask a Question box on the webinar console. And feel free to submit questions as we go along. We have such a great panel, and as for our discussion, I'll ask you all some questions and then you can weigh in. Let's get started. What were some of the obstacles faced by the shift to telework while working with government customers? Carrie, could you weigh in on that one?
Sure, thanks, Kim. And I just want to say thank you for having us and pulling this panel together today. I think this is an incredibly important dialogue that we continue to have as we're all facing, the shifts and changes that this pandemic has brought. So, I'm really happy to have this conversation and hopefully have some good dialogue afterward with our participants. To answer your question, so COVID changed not just the way that we worked internally within our own organizations, but also how we worked with our industry and our government partners. From the services perspective, this really hit us hard because partner engagement and one-on-one discussions and group brainstorming is the core of our business. The ways in which that we could work together literally changed overnight. What we've seen so far, both within our own organization and across industry and with our government partners, it's really come down to two, I would say, main areas that we've seen the obstacles. One is from a cultural perspective. The second is from an infrastructure perspective. When we talk about culture, for me, that's what I felt, right off the bat. It had a large impact on all of us, I think, regardless of how, used to we were with remote work and the idea of telework. I think that was actually what really created and some of the biggest obstacles came from was that, one, telework and the idea and the concept of remote work was not necessarily an accepted norm across the federal marketplace. And from that perspective, that leads to an inherent lack of trust in our ability to stay productive and to get the work done. That caused some serious obstacles. And then third, I think all of these together then caused a shift to what we all understood and knew to be kind of our normal workday. There was a significant shift to how we conducted our days for various reasons that I think created a lot of obstacles for us. And then from an infrastructure perspective, I'll say infrastructure, but also aging infrastructure. The urgency with which we had to address the rush and accommodate the mass telework really created connectivity and accessibility issues. And I don't know, Bobby or Gary, do you guys want to comment on this? I know you had firsthand experience and were much closer to the infrastructure obstacles.
Yeah, definitely. I'll weigh in, and you're right on point, Carrie. What I would say is from a technology perspective, from both the employee and then the infrastructure side on the organization side, there's been a lack of ability to support the technology, like the laptops and all those functionalities and different functionality, different operations remotely. There's been a lack of platforms for collaborations and being able to access your webmail, and then you having to use personal laptops, mobile devices. Those are all things that have helped, have actually impacted the employees. And so we have to understand this is an unusual volume of employees working from home over a short period of time. And so it puts a unique stress test on the federal IT systems and the employee home environments as well. So you have to implement things like strong connectivity, correct hardware, networking, and collaboration tools to the video conference solutions, even being able to implement things like file sharing mechanisms in place, being able to put those in place for user interactions from anywhere around the world. And the most important thing is making sure it's secure from end to end.
And Carrie, do you want to elaborate more about any of the obstacles you all saw, either on the company side or with serving government customers?
Sure, I can dig a little bit deeper into the points I made earlier. I think, when we talk about telework, I think it's really important to remember that when this all started, we were facing a very broad spectrum when it came to how readily available and even how accepted telework and, remote work options were. I think you had, one end, some of the agencies and organizations were very used to telework and had telework programs instilled. I know of one agency that was experimenting with almost 90% telework during the week, with one day designated as an in-office, in-person meeting day. On the, other end of the spectrum, you had the organizations where, unscheduled telework was about, as best as it got. It was, maybe some people on a case-by-case basis had one or two telework days, but it was obviously, not a norm, and it wasn't something that everybody was used to. So as a result, you were looking at, a lack of mature and even consistent processes and policies around remote work. So here we were faced with, okay, tomorrow don't come in the office, you have to work remotely, and everybody, regardless of how comfortable they were with it, had to accommodate. So then, that led to then the trust issue. And I can't tell you how many times before all of this, I heard things like, how do I know people working from home aren't, watching TV and doing laundry? They're not answering the phone. They must be out, mowing the lawn or doing the grocery shopping. Things like that. It just created this underlying, lack of trust. And so I think when this all started, trust is not an easy thing to build, but we kind of had to just trust that it was going to happen and we were going to be able to do this and be productive and be responsive, and so where that started to really come out was, we had to earn that trust. We had to prove that we could be more productive and get our jobs more, done remotely. So that meant we had to be more responsive. We had to be more available. We had to be as flexible as possible to accommodate everyone's schedules. And that then led to this, what I talked about, the new work day, and kind of what we knew as the normal work day, 8 to 4, 9 to 5. It became more of a 10 to 12 to 14 to 16-hour day because, I mean, let's be honest, especially those of us in the DC metro area, we gained hours back in our days because we didn't have to commute anymore. Commute went from maybe 3 hours to 30 seconds. So when that happened, you then have this span of additional working hours in your day. And what do you do with it? I'll speak to me personally. When this all started, my daily scramble was get everybody out the door, get my kids off to school, make sure everyone's taken care of, and get to work. Now those hours are used instead to really scramble to get my emails done, to make sure I'm planned, my day is planned out. I know all of the different things that have to be done and try to get as much as I can crammed in before people wake up or now before the distance learning begins and somebody's asking for help. I think we all share in that, the shift. And one of the things I think that we've all had to face has been learning how to accommodate and be sensitive to and be flexible with the competing schedules now, because no two of us are going to have the exactly the same schedule, exactly the same juggle every day. So being flexible and accommodating, yet also being responsive is really become key. And I would say in the last 5 months, it's gotten, a lot better. But I think the one thing we're going to have to watch out for is, it's just not sustainable to constantly feel that pull to be answering every phone call and email and being okay with a meeting at, 7 a.m. or 8 p.m. I think we have to be careful of, potential burnout and just make sure that we're all working together to take care of one another through this.
Right, sure. And these remote work challenges imposed by the pandemic also put a spotlight, as Carrie mentioned, on aging and insufficient infrastructure in much of the federal government. What do government agencies need to consider as they look to modernize IT environments and address architecture gaps? Gary?
Yeah, so for me, it really comes down to three primary things: data security, data access, and infrastructure flexibility. Because what we saw, and Carrie kind of mentioned this, telework wasn't widely adopted. There were some small pockets of really embracing it. But what we saw in a lot of these agencies was their infrastructure was sized only to handle kind of the remote worker 1 day a week. Hey, every Friday I work from home. Every Thursday I work from home. So they sized it to 1/5 of their total workforce, really, in most cases. And when they push everyone back out to the house, now everyone's connected and they're running out of VPN concentrator connections. VDI is not sized appropriately. So what they did is they did the only thing they really could do, and they went out and said, I know this works, I'm going to buy more of it. And I'm just going to buy it, as quick as I can install it. I know it works. They didn't really look at, is this the appropriate solution? Is this going to scale? Is this where going to take me into the future? And that's really kind of the limitation of that approach is we've addressed the initial problem, but we may find ourselves in that agency may find itself in a configuration that doesn't scale for the next pandemic or when everyone ends up staying at home. Because I've seen some agencies are talking about we're never going back into the office. My people are so productive. It's so great. So I think when they look at that, they need to, now that we've been able to kind of take a breath and we've addressed that near-term gap, is look at it and go, I bought a lot of this. Is it the right solution going in the future? Does it scale for where I need to go? And does it provide the services and capabilities that I need for in the future? And I'll kind of let Bobby talk about the security element because that's something that's really close to him. So.
Yeah, definitely. You're spot on, Gary. And just to add to that, agencies that are prepared, then they have a better and easier transition over to a telework scenario, such as what's going on right now. And so what I mean by prepared is implementing certain security tools and certain tools like encryption, multi-factor authentication, virtual private networks, virtual desktop infrastructures, putting those things in place. And don't forget about the firewalls, making sure that the firewalls are accurate and the ports are open as well. And so all those mechanisms, those things are really important. And you have to implement certain collaboration tools like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Hangout. Those data management and collaboration tools are all important to implement into the environment. And every tool that we all know that all the employees have are things like email, virtual private networks, instant messaging, video conferencing. And so they all require one thing, internet connection. So you must add things like a fast and reliable internet connection that's secure in their home and in the remote location of the data center for the organizations as well.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't that every solution was undersized. I think people identified solutions that were really relevant during this time. We have a solution at one of our government agencies, one of our customers, that they saw 400% increase in adoption because it enabled and empowered this remote worker and remote data access in a secure fashion. So people have identified these solutions that they may not have necessarily known about or used, but as they kind of word goes through the grapevine, or they find, hey, I used this solution. I was able to get my data at home. I was able to get it on my phone. It was great. So you see this increased adoption of tools that they may not have been aware of or looked at. So I think that's one of the things where that particular customer had really kind of positioned and done that analysis. And when they did the procurement, thought about, okay, how is this going to scale in the future? Where do I want to be as an agency and as a service provider providing to my customers? And make sure that it is flexible and dynamic. Because I talked about, infrastructure flexibility. We want to make sure that we're avoiding siloed architecture and old protocols. Look towards the future, things like AI, ML, et cetera, and make sure that you're positioned for the future with that technology.
Right. And 5 months into the pandemic, what technologies and approaches should agencies be considering now, Bobby?
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. That's a great question. One strategy I believe is the most important strategy I believe is really testing. So you must test, test, test. And so that means that you must be prepared. And if you're not prepared, then you'll have bad performance in your organization, which can bring some of those pain points out within your organization. And so agencies should put their networks to a stress test, right? Just to make sure that some of those things are implemented and the network can handle some of the load that when adopting some of those new technologies. And the new technologies that I'm talking about for risk reduction are things like cloud adoption and analytics. And I'm sure Gary can touch a little bit more on the AI and ML pieces, but that's no longer an option to be put in place. And thinking about least privileged scenarios, those things are important for security mechanisms, and hackers can now gain access to end user networks and impact the organization. And speaking of access, we need to be able to have access to your data anywhere, anytime, any place. Those things are important.
Yeah, and Bobby mentioned this, the artificial intelligence and machine learning industry has a lot of great tools out there that allow them to infuse that into infrastructures, even aging infrastructures in some cases. So I think customers really want to look at that because it allows them to be more operationally efficient and take advantage of the years of experience the industry has in processing these algorithms, and it allows them to be more efficient. We can use that to influence things like automation and orchestration engines. And this is by no means automating the entire data center, but it allows it to move into more of a low touch environment. The other thing that I think a lot of agencies that have been successful in this, we saw if they had cloud-based platforms, it was relatively easy for them because they didn't have to connect to the local data center. They just connected to the cloud from their home using, multi-factor authentication technologies like that. Look at those procurement strategies. A lot of agencies have trouble with the color of money, but not everyone. I can't think of one agency that buys everything outright CapEx today or capital expenditure. They don't spend cash anymore. So they need to continue that shifting of that procurement strategy to where the government doesn't own everything. Does this make sense to live in the cloud? Let's look at this at a more flexible financial model, because now we can do things like burst up and scale up very quickly. So that's an important element as well, is looking at that procurement strategy.
And to add to something that Bobby touched on, something that's been near and dear to the services side of the organization, and something that we've really found is that we not only have to be comfortable with, but we also have to be, conversant in all of the different collaboration platforms and technologies that are out there, because no one organization necessarily uses the same one. So when we're engaging with any of our partners, you could go from one meeting on Zoom to another meeting on Teams, later in the day you're on Skype or WebEx, and some are even still using just plain old teleconference bridges. So it's one of those things where we've got to ensure that we're remaining productive and we're able to, engage in the most efficient way on any of these different platforms. And as this just continues, it's becoming, even some agencies are finding that what they had in place is just not conducive to enabling the type of collaboration that needs to happen. We have whiteboard sessions and solutioning sessions all the time with our partners. And, in some instances in the beginning, it was, we have no secure way to do video conferences. So we were, emailing Visio diagrams, PowerPoint slides, you name it, to kind of, go along with and support the conference call. And then, over time, I've seen the last couple of months, some of the agencies that had some of the security issues and the different requirements were able to find workarounds, were able to find a secure environment, to use Skype, for their internal collaboration. So we've seen a big uptick and progress on that side of things. But from an organization like ours, where we're working with, a broad range of partners across government and industry, being able to know how to get in and share slides and potentially whiteboard and engage on any of those platforms is really important. And I think it's important for all of us to be ready for that, because, we're constantly engaging in different scenarios.
Great. And Carrie, how can the government better facilitate its own remote workforce, as well as the outside partners it needs to support their work in this environment?
So I would say, first and foremost, stay flexible. And with that, stay reasonable, because we have to remember we're all in this together. We're all experiencing this, some in very similar ways, some in very different ways. What may be, very easy for one organization might be extremely cumbersome. The same thing might be extremely cumbersome in another organization. So I think that this current situation with the pandemic has offered the government a chance to really re-examine how to be more productive and enable and empower their people to work more effectively. Allow for more flexibility, in how the employees structure their work days. Empower them to structure their days, that are going to accommodate both their work, their team, colleagues, you name it, but also, the different stresses on their personal lives and the things and responsibilities they have on the personal side of things. I think we have to all acknowledge that we're facing unforeseen circumstances, and we're going to have to be able to flex and allow people to do what's best for them so that they can be as productive as possible. That goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the shift to, the shift of what we consider a normal workday. Let's make sure that we're accommodating the flexibility that's necessary so that it doesn't lead to burnout. It doesn't lead to, something that is just not sustainable over time, because I think, this is not going away anytime soon. As Bobby mentioned earlier, we're going to have to find ways to work around it. And I think lastly, I would say what goes hand in hand with this is allowing for creativity, encouraging creativity, find solutions to do things the best way you can. I think one of the, I think Gary might have touched on it earlier, a lot of, my colleagues and partners work in SCIFs where remote work, you could not do remote work because of the security requirements. So, we had to get really creative with how, we conducted the work in that workspace, but also accommodated all of the different, social distancing guidelines and whatnot. So you're looking at, 1 week off, 1 week on, things like that. So I think finding those creative solutions is going to be key. I think we've been really lucky that we've been able to get creative and keep work moving. So yeah, as long as we're empowering and enabling our people to do that, I think it's a good opportunity to find new and better ways to do things.
Yeah, and I can definitely touch on that as well. And you're right, Carrie. Flexibility is extremely important, and creativity has been extremely important. And we understand that it's difficult, right? It's difficult throughout this transition. And I even had an experience with a customer um, where their company laptops did not have some of the collaboration tools that were needed to communicate with the vendors. So one form of communication that saved them was communicating over the phone while sending them the slides and guiding them through the process of reading each slide, you know. So that was true collaboration, but that was also flexibility and creativity to get around and still solve some of those problems that were needed. And so the government really they have to ask themselves some key questions to achieve success. You know, things like what infrastructure is needed to support everyone working remotely in the customer environment and the employees environment. What tools are needed to help the workforce collaborate and communicate effectively, both internally and externally to the organization. And also, how do you maintain network capacity and performance, as well as some of the secure connections in place? And how will all this evolve over time? And what does the future look like for them? And I'm sure Gary, he can add some more insight to this.
Well, I mean, the biggest, yeah, y'all hit a lot of the points, but I think one of the things that no one ever thought about was how do I deal with a remote workforce from an IT support issue? You can call in and get, passwords reset, things of that nature, but we're also having employees at home having issues with their laptops. They're physically breaking. I had a customer that actually the audio jack on their laptop, and it wasn't just walking down the hall at lunchtime and let Jim fix it for him, then he comes back after lunch and it's all fixed. Now you have to go through this additional complexity of, okay, how do we physically get to your government furnished equipment and fix it? We have to send a tech to your house. They have to do the social distancing, the mask, and everything. Mm-hmm. And it's a continuing kind of challenge that they're continuing to work through, and it's really shifting the paradigm of how do you support technology in the government space, because it's not just everything within the four walls anymore. Now it's these four walls and your four walls and Bobby's four walls. So I think it's that challenge that they're getting better at, and a lot of these collaboration tools are helping with that, being able to take remote control of desktops, things of that nature. So.
And Bobby, can you talk a little bit more about risk management and how can federal agencies approach risk management to safeguard remote data accessibility?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great question. Throughout this time, risk management is something that should not be forgotten and should definitely be implemented differently with teleworking in place. And at the highest level, I would say that the agency should implement certain solutions. Like I've already talked about virtual private networks or multi-factor authentication, but also implementing things like intrusion detection systems, being able to set up some of the firewalls to match the organizational scope, and also being able to inspect some of those endpoint devices, which means implementing antivirus software on some of the endpoint devices that are connecting to their network. And to dive a little deeper and get more specific, just throw in there or implement a risk management team for the teleworking to ensure all the risks are thought out and all of them are covered. And implementing things like ensuring that you have a systematic approach to redundancy. And so the infrastructure in place, making sure that that is redundant, where employees, if they lose connection to the internal network, then the system administrators can still work to get the connection back up and running. And also asking yourself questions like, what data can be safely stored locally and backed up upon reconnecting to the environment? You make sure that your active data is as close to you as possible. That's key, because if you lose connection to that central location, then the workers are still able to work. The employees are still able to work. And we have to understand that there are real IT security threats out there, and it gets worse with teleworking in full force. So securely accessing your data from anywhere in the world is important because that is where the data can be anywhere, right? So you have to really think about those things and put those things in place. And just to touch on it, I know Gary touched on it a little bit, but implementing AI and machine learning mechanisms, this is the right time to do it because you're able to identify some of the noise in the environment. There is a such thing as information overload, so you want to identify the right noise that is being created from the collaboration tools in your environment. And this will help to power collaboration platforms by implementing those AI and ML mechanisms.
Yeah, and you mentioned firewalls, Bobby. A lot of people think about firewalls as to keep the external threat out. We also still retain the insider threat. Everyone was worried, worried about the Snowden walking out of the office with the USB thumb drive full of data. Now we've given them remote access to that data. So the insider threat has moved from those four walls to their home. So things like, security processes, making sure that we have the appropriate rules around data access restrictions in place, that people have the right access to the right data, but only the data that they should have. And things like audit logs for CISOs is even more important, so we can make sure that we track those data accesses and understand who's doing what, when they're doing it, and should they be doing it. So those AI ML tools help with that as well, but it's really important now to make sure that we understand who's accessing what.
And it sounds like one of the outcomes of this forced innovation is helping federal agencies establish technology-driven trust. Bobby, how do you establish technology-driven trust?
Oh, I say the key to doing that is establishing some best practices for your end-to-end data management. Being able, and when I talk about data management, it's a holistic approach. Everything from ingesting the data from any source, any data type, being able to do things with the data, find unique patterns in it, being able to do knowledge sharing, being able to analyze the data. So I talked about ingesting, analyzing it, and turning it into something that's valuable for the end user is very, very important. And you also have to limit information being accessed to only people that are authorized to access some of that data. So providing access only to the information that's needed to perform their jobs is key. And you always have to ask yourself some questions, right? I always talk about asking yourself some of those very important questions throughout this time. Things like how much data is being stored locally versus virtually, as I talked about before, and how many people are accessing the VPN on a daily basis. How often are some of the tools being used? So analyzing that data to help make better decisions and support the decisions that are already being made. And also these are assessments, right? So you have to do assessments over time to be able to shed light on many things within the organization.
Yeah, and technology-driven trust also is trusting the solution. So we have the solution that we were talking about that had the massive growth, but they had only exposed it to their intranet, so within their private network, if you will. And we work with them to put in place the proper security framework so they could actually expose it to the internet. So people can access this information from anywhere in the world. So that's where important things like CAC-enabled technologies come into, and multi-factor authentication comes into play. We were able to really expose, is probably not the best word, but expose that solution to this telework remote workforce while ensuring that we're still meeting the security requirements of the data. So I think that's important is look at all the options that are available in, it kind of goes back to that challenging the status quo, because 6-9 months ago, we would have never thought about exposing this to the internet. But because we have that technology-driven trust around the security frameworks, the protocols, the rules, and the policies that we have in place, we were able to do that and really mobilize that data for the workforce.
Right, and how have the current circumstances changed the way your company deals with current and new government partners on a day-to-day basis? How does Hitachi Vantara Federal help them stay productive and keep the wheels turning? Gary?
Yeah, I think what we've done is we've become very creative at the way, because historically you do face-to-face meetings. You go in, you sit in the office, you see the person, and you talk. And especially as you look at our services engagements, which is where we're really doing the kind of that last mile install configuration or maintenance break fix, we've had to get really creative. So we actually had a POC that was starting with one of our customers where historically we would have deployed somebody to that data center. They would have walked in, they would have done the install with the government employee. And we had to come up with an alternative solution where we actually did a remote services engagement, working through a WebEx that the agency provided, actually doing the software installs in conjunction with a government employee. And I think it was beneficial because not only were we able to get the POC done on time and successfully, it actually was a better experience, I think, for the government employee because he was able to see everything that was going on in that implementation and was able to ask questions as he went through that implementation. Why are you doing that? You know, what is that setting adjust? So I think it actually provided them an opportunity to become much more comfortable with the solution that they had never worked with before because they had that kind of ride-along experience with them. So.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Gary, and you're spot on. One of the things that I've experienced is that it's very, very important to be that trusted partner and being able to help the customer solve some of those hard problems, right? I mean, if you think about it, businesses that are thriving today, they aren't selling just stuff. They're not selling stuff to the customer. They're really selling and they're helping the customer drive home on some of those solving some of those hard problems, you know. And we need to deeply and genuinely understand our clients' business and life. Do things like offering free training that's online, being able to do things like education sessions, lunch and learns, you know, video training, being able to help them throughout their entire operation and helping them solve some of those hard problems. That's key, and I'm sure Carrie can add to this as well.
Yeah, sure. You know, Gary started to touch on it, just what he said around the services engagements. You know, when this all started, we were in the middle of, you know, installation and customization jobs on customer sites that were secure environments or on a military base. So, you know, the pandemic happened, everything shut down, and we really had to take a serious pause because we could no longer get access to the actual site or the data center where the hardware and the software sat, you know. And in some of our, you know, to Gary's point earlier, some of our customers, we historically would never do, or they were not set up to accommodate remote access into their environment. So for us, you know, it's become, you know, the question now is not, is it possible to do remote work, you know, or, you know, for the historical, you know, engagements where we typically would go on site, it's now become okay, how can we do this remotely? Because, you know, even if, you know, we're starting to get on site now and finish up some of the engagements that we had to pause a few months ago, but we know this isn't going away. So the question now becomes, how do we help you regardless of the situation? What is going to be the easiest, seeing what we have in front of us? I think, you know, and we've always been an organization, and especially when we're discussing some of the services engagements, we've always treated each engagement uniquely, and we've always worked very creatively with our customers. You know, as Bobby mentioned, we try to be that trusted advisor, and we try to come in and find the best solution for that particular customer and to fit their needs, their security requirements, the enhancements that are going to be most meaningful for them. Now more than ever, I think not only do we have to treat each engagement on a case-by-case basis, but as we, you know, move down this path, we're finding there are a lot of best practices out there that have just evolved in the last, you know, month or two. There are a lot of lessons learned that maybe they don't apply exactly to the next engagement, but there are a lot of things that we've learned to do that we could creatively solve maybe some issues, or, you know, overcome some of the obstacles that are there to enable the remote work. So I think for us, it's recognizing that no one solution is going to fit every situation. We just continue to work very closely with our partners to ensure that we're being as creative and flexible as possible to bring them not just the right solution, but deliver it in the right way.
Yeah, I think that's great, Carrie. And I know we've talked about quite a few things today, but I would leave everyone kind of these four key takeaways out of the conversation we've had is be flexible and be prepared. Continue to test your infrastructure and make sure that you're flexible with not only your technology, but your people. And that kind of feeds into the empower and enable your workforce. Make sure that you're giving them the tools and the access that they need to complete their job and be successful. Because we talked a lot about, making sure that they don't get burned out because we have extra time now. And it's been my experience, most people work a lot more. So, empower and enable them to be productive. And challenge the status quo. And this is really from an IT and tools perspective. Make sure that you're continually evaluating new technologies. Just staying inside your comfort zone is great for your comfort, but you don't grow unless you get outside that comfort zone. I'm not saying take unnecessary risk, but really understand kind of what you're gaining with this technology and does it position you for the future. And lastly, collaborate and learn from each other. That solution growth that we saw in that one solution was because people talked through the grapevine. They said, hey, I found this great tool, this great solution. You should go check it out. So make sure that you continue the collaboration. It's a harder muscle movement now as we get into this because it's not as easy as just walking down the hall. You have to do that extra mile. But make sure that you continue that collaboration. That's so important to be in a productive agency. And for more information on this, check out our website at hitachivantara.federal.com and check out our blog post up there as well.
Right, great. Thank you, Gary. Those are great insights and great advice from all of you on kind of how to operate in this environment. Looks like we have some time for Q&A. As a reminder, to submit a question electronically, use the Ask a Question box on your webinar console. Okay, it looks like we have some questions in. This one, maybe Gary and Carrie, you guys could address. Do you ever see a return to normal for remote workers?
I'll go ahead and start. And I think it's hard to kind of see that far in the future because we don't really have a specific, there hasn't been a vaccine. We haven't, a lot of offices, not even just the federal government, haven't gone back to work. And I think a lot of people are kind of waiting to find out. And I think when it does happen, it'll be a staggered normal. But a lot of agencies may find, like I mentioned, that people are so productive, there's no need for them to be in the office where it had never occurred to them. And a lot of commercial enterprises known this for a while. But what you'll probably see is people of less amount of people will go back or you'll see them do even more telework where they're only going to come into the office and the locations when they have a reason to collaborate with somebody face to face or something of that nature. I don't know, Carrie, kind of what your view on it is.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, what we think of as the new normal is going to continue to change and evolve. I think what we viewed as normal 6 months ago is very different from the new normal that, we would describe today. And I think as things progress and continue to change over the next several months, to Gary's point, I don't know that it's going to be as normal as it once was to be working in the office. I don't know that it's going to be as normal for us to spend hours commuting when we've seen how productive we can be working from home. It will be really interesting to see some of the organizations and some of our government partners that were not used to telework and did not have those policies or environments in place, how quickly they adapt and make that, the rule rather than the exception. So I think, Gary just touched on it. I think we will return to some set of normal or some sense of normal, but I think it's going to look very different from what our normal was before the pandemic. And I say that with optimism, and I think it's going to be something good that comes out of it, because we're going to find new and different ways to get our work done, despite some of the obstacles that we may have felt in the very beginning of this.
Sure, thanks, Carrie. And Bobby, maybe you could answer this one. Do you think it's smart to implement AI or artificial intelligence now during this telework transition? And how can it make employees' lives easier?
Great question. My response would be, if you are a government employee or have been in the workforce for a fair amount of time, then I'm sure you've at least heard of machine learning or artificial intelligence in some aspect. If you have cycles, then definitely you should definitely implement AI or ML, because it will be extremely beneficial. So my recommendation would be yes, definitely implement that if you have the cycles. And as far as making lives easier for employees, I would say in the IT space, machines are already doing things like performing cybersecurity checks or resolving some technical issues for customers, and putting measurements in place for compliance with technology guidelines. And all of these tasks could be completed by humans, but may require workers to divert from their regular day-to-day responsibilities or to be present in the physical office. So automation is key, and automating some of those manual tasks is where AI and ML come into play. The goal would be to really free up more time for managers and employees. If you think about it, so here's an example. If a company is working on securing servers, a technician may need to visit a particular location to troubleshoot or work on a particular problem. With machine learning in place, and if you employ machine learning, you're able to assess the problem or propose a solution in a less amount of time and without incurring any travel expenses. So yes, definitely implement machine learning and AI if you can.
Sure. Thanks, Bobby. And this one, maybe Gary or Carrie, you guys could take a shot at this one. What advice or how would you handle a customer who has the ability and the infrastructure to allow telework, but doesn't see the value in allowing their employees or contractors to telework? What advice would you have in that situation?
That's a really good question.
I actually, I'll kind of start, Carrie, and you can finish. So in the AFCEA DC DISA panel last week, one of the managers in there said she just assumed that when people were at home they weren't working, and she says maybe in retrospect they weren't working when they were in the office. So I think people that are productive are going to continue to be productive even if you allow them to telework. I think there's some aspects of the job that require face-to-face collaboration or physical access to something, that doesn't work for telework. But I think you would be surprised at how effective employees can be in their own environment. Now, that's not to say it's not for everyone. You have to be pretty disciplined. I actually used to have a guy that worked for me that would lock himself in his office because his wife would always come up and say, "You need to go mow the grass. You need to go do this." And he literally locked himself in his office at home with a coffee maker. He had a little bar fridge. So, but that's been the anomaly in my career that I've seen. So I think it's just kind of, if they weren't forced to go dip their toe in the water, it's a good time to try to dip your toe in that water and test out the telework, because I think most people are going to be pleasantly surprised that their people are just as effective at home, even more effective, because like we mentioned in the webinar, they're working even more hours. So now you've got to go to the other extreme and worry about the burnout. So,
and I think I would add to that, if they have the ability and the infrastructure to accommodate the telework, helping them find ways to see the value in it by offering some best practices or, possibly how to more effectively use the collaboration tools that are available to you, I think starts to help garner a little bit more adoption. And I'll give an example. We had a customer we've been working with, and because of their security requirements, they just did not have a collaboration tool to use in the beginning. And what they knew from, right from the start, Visio and Excel and emailing things back and forth was just not going to be conducive to the amount of solutioning and brainstorming and the depth of technical discussions that we were having. So they started working really hard to find a collaboration platform. There were a lot of limitations. They kept thinking we were going to have to set up meetings and find ways to get into the office and everyone around the table. And one of the things that we started to enable them to do is use some of the whiteboarding technology or functionality that was in what they were using. They decided they were going to start using WebEx. And there's some whiteboarding functionality in there that we were able to show them how to use and use effectively while we were on a call. Even so much as holding up, somebody had an iPad, an iPad Pro that you can write on. And as they were talking, writing on it like you would a whiteboard. Things like that. And I think over time, they started realizing we don't need to go into the office and sit around a table and put everyone at risk. We can get this done. And I think that adoption will slowly come. It's just a matter of, I see it as our job as a partner is really to help them see the benefit and the different options there are to be even more productive. You're not wasting time trying to get somebody, through security to come to your office and get everybody, everyone has to drive down and, take Metro or whatever. Now it's, hey, we need to have a quick call. Let's get everybody on the phone and let's do it right away. See how much faster things can get done. So, I mean, that's my advice is really find the best practices, use lessons learned, and help them figure out how to really, facilitate what they need with the tools that are available to them, or even give them options that they could even look into.
Right, sure. And this is kind of a follow-on to that line of questioning. Do you all expect to see companies start screening potential employees for their own IT infrastructure at their homes, such as having a minimum internet speed that they have access to, having their own secure routers, and expecting employees to pay more of those costs?
I know I can speak. Gary, I don't know if you want to talk to this specifically. That's actually a really good idea. And I know that I've had conversations with folks that we're looking to hire to make sure that they can accommodate the remote work, make sure that they've got everything that they need. If we need to help them, I think now everybody almost has a home office all set up. But interesting question, because I think as we start to move forward, things like internet speed. I know I just upgraded mine in my house because, having my husband and I both working from home and on calls all day and our kids starting distance learning, we knew it was going to bog down our system. So I don't know, Gary, do you think this is something that we'll start to talk to people about?
I mean, it's almost kind of a minimum requirement to work anymore that you have an internet and cell phone, at least in industry we've had for years, and most companies reimburse for it because there is that expectation that when you're remote, you'll be checking your email, or when you're, if you are teleworking at home, you'll be able to turn on your video chat. So, so for example, the internet stipend that we get at Hitachi Vantara Federal doesn't pay for all my internet, but I also use the internet for more than just work, stream movies, etc. I think there's going to have to be a certain expectation. But if you're going to require specific hardware, specific types, you either have to publish that list or reimburse them for that list. I think because everyone's at different places. I know a lot of people commute from far away where they may not have high-speed internet. It was only probably 7 years ago. I live out in a rural county, and we didn't have anything more than DSL, which is minimally effective at doing, internet and dial-up. It's not fast enough for video and streaming. Now I got 2 TVs streaming. I'm on the computer. My son's on the computer doing virtual teaching. So yeah, I think you'll kind of have to see that as a requirement. So as almost a technology requirement, you have to have the experience to do this job, but I also need you to have this bare minimum of technology.
Right, sure. And Bobby, at the beginning, you mentioned how important testing is. What advice do you have for companies or government organizations starting to pursue more network stress testing? What kind of things should they consider?
Yeah, great question. I would say if you think about it, a handful of high-end testing products have had to evolve quickly. So you're starting to see some of those products come out. And they're evolving quickly really to meet those challenges and evaluate how network and security devices perform under stress and isolate and repair some of the flaws that are in place on both ends, right? Both the employees network and the data centers network as well. So I would implement some stress testing mechanisms at more of the higher layer, and load tolerance, and put some load tolerance products in place as well, and then generate high volumes of stateful application traffic to test the network. I would also test security and the firewall ports, so put those things in place, test the network for performance and load, as I talked about earlier, and do some vendor evaluation testing, really to ensure the solutions really meet your needs, giving you the ability to access and secure your data from anywhere around the world.
Right, sure. And Gary and Carrie, what advice do you have for government organizations that need to employ services from a contractor, and on how to identify what to get help with, as far as, supporting a remote workforce or modernizing IT? How do they prioritize their projects, or kind of what advice would you give to them?
Gary, you want to start, or do you want me to?
You can go ahead and start. So
I think one of the things, and I'm going to talk more from a project, like an engagement perspective. One of the things that I think we've really had to deal with is almost rethinking how we approach project planning, and really thinking about not just what are the requirements for the engagement and what do you need to get done, but prioritizing things based on what infrastructure is available, what are your security requirements, what are some additional things that need to be put in place to make this happen. I think we also see a need to be very realistic in the fact that we're all working remotely, and in many cases, it's not an easy step to get access to things remotely. So there are going to be delays. There are going to be delays from a technology perspective, just obtaining laptops if you're working in a secure environment. How do you get people those laptops? What happens if you need to, if something happens and you need to fix one? And accommodating all of the different and moving pieces becomes very important. So what used to be a very, let's say, straight, we have 4 priorities, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is our timeline. You now have to really start thinking about all of those different pieces, the security requirements, the potential delays, and add them into your risk posture, because it's not going to be the same, and it's going to take a little bit of time for all of us to get used to some of these things. So the questions you ask become a little bit different up front. And I think it's very much kind of the norm now that we make sure there's a plan B. If you can't get there in person, if it has to be done remotely, how is that going to get done? And do you have what you need to make that happen? Right. I don't know if you want to talk to on the kind of the IT side of it.
Yeah, I think it's just making sure that you have those flexible tools and the collaboration tools like we talked about around the services engagements, using something like WebEx or just making sure that the access is in place to allow that type of remote services work for your contractors.
Right, sure. Okay, thank you. Well, that is our time for Q&A. Thanks to our viewers for submitting questions. For any that went unanswered, the panelists will follow up with you directly offline. Thank you to Carrie, Gary, and Bobby for presenting today, and thanks to all of you for joining us. For more information about their company's efforts and published blogs, please visit www.hitachivontera.federal.com. You can also continue to link to the archived version of this webinar and also see previous Signal Magazine webinars on AFCEA's Signal Magazine website, which is www.afcea.org/signal/webinar. This concludes our Signal Media webinar. Thanks again and have a good day.